Hello everyone. In the previous lecture, we examined the participation of women in the Indian National Congress Party as well as independence movements in a broader concept in the late 19th and early 20th centuries India. The lecture outlined the Indian National Congress's evolution from a reformist body to a mass nationalist movement, and how this shift enabled increasing female political participation. Sparked by the 19th century social reform movements promoting women's education and rights, women from the elite and reformist backgrounds gradually entered a political life. Pioneers like Swarna Kumari Devi and Sarojini Naidu helped lay the groundwork, while others such as Aruna Asaf Ali, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and Kasturba Gandhi emerged as influential leaders in major movements such as the non-cooperation movement, the civil disobedience movement and the Quit India movement. All these movements have been discussed in detail in the previous lecture. Despite societal constraints and traditional gender norms, many women defied expectations to join protests, lead initiatives and face imprisonment. The lecture also highlighted the complexities of their roles as symbols, citizens and aspiring leaders, underscoring both their struggles and triumphs in transforming India's political landscape before and after independence. Now, we have to remember that women's participation during the nationalist period was not just limited to the Gandhian movements and the Indian National Congress. They also participated in movements that challenged the notion of a unified nation. Especially notable are women's performances and participation in the Ambedkarite movement and Periyar's self-respect movement, which ran parallel to the nationalist movements but had very different ideas about freedom, equality and agency. In this lecture, we will look at women's participation in the Ambedkarite movement. Now, we have already looked at Ambedkar and his views on the ideas of nation and gender in the previous lectures. If you have any confusion, you can go back to that and take a look. Now, in this lecture, we will begin with a noted book that documents women's participation in the Ambedkarite movement. It is titled We Also Made History, Women in the Ambedkarite Movement, published in 1989 and written by Urmila Pawar and Meenakshi Moon. Before going into the history of women's participation in the Ambedkarite movements, it is important to talk about the purpose and the structure of the book, because that will give us a clear idea as to how it contributes significantly in constructing an alternative identity for Dalit women. This book is divided into two parts. The first part outlines the involvement of women in various Dalit struggles from early 20th century, and they list the struggles of Dalit women as they participated in Dalit movements. And while doing so, the book draws on diverse sources, including periodicals, record of meetings, and personal correspondence. The second section of the book consists of interviews with Dalit women activists from the 1930s. Both these sections provide a rich store of material for historians of the Dalit movement and of feminism in India. The book gives two kinds of self-expressions by Dalit women. First, authors as narrators of women's participation in the struggle for the untouchables, and authors as biographers and interviewers of women activists in this struggle. Now, as we have spoken in the previous lectures, writing history along with the narratives of those who participated in that history provides an alternative historiography and epistemology from the perspective of Dalit women. And herein we get to see gender and caste as intersectional. Such perspective presents history as consequence of personal and collective liberation and not simply as the documentation of grand narratives. These are mini narratives in multitudinous forms. It does not just write Dalit women and history, it narrates how Dalit women create history. By adding interviews of Dalit women who participated in the Ambedkarite movement along with the history of the said movement, the book challenges the strategies of constructing history as a narration of the past and breaks its supposed linearity of time. Emphasizing on the mini narratives also challenges the notion of who can become subjects and narrators of history. Hence, it is not narrating the grand figures like Ambedkar and Phule. It talks about how their policies affected and shaped the political consciousness of Dalit women by merging the historical with the personal. It reinforces that personal is political. This book presents personal experiences as valid sources that shape political consciousness. It views personal experience as a consequence of social and political realities of its time. However, it does not accept experience as an unmediated account. As the authors mention, it was necessary to cross-check the information we received from these women, especially the dates, times, occasions, and subjects of meetings and conferences from contemporary sources. This humongous effort shows that experiences are affected by times. The two ways in which autonomy of Dalit women is claimed through this text are by participating in the Ambedkarite movement and fighting for a gendered awareness of caste and claiming their social and constitutional rights, and second, by publishing and writing a book that gives voice to these women's narratives, thereby making them valid subjects and sources of history. As Spivak points out, they are not objects of pity to be explained by upper caste women, they are subjects. In We Also Made History, writing becomes a collective enterprise. The process of gathering information from Dalit women activists helps build a network of affection, friendship, patience, and a sense of solidarity. Rewriting the experiences of these women helps reclaim Dalit women's agency and subjectivity. By mapping a narrative that goes beyond the limits of temporality and by including collective narrative mode, the linearity and individuality of an autobiography is disturbed. It is not merely an author's remembrance of things past. It is a journey from the present to recover the collective memory. Pawar and Moon write, the purpose of doing all this was to try and form a picture of the neglected, underrated women activists from the Ambedkar movement. Her capability, the history she had made in the most adverse circumstances, the change that took place in her because of that history, the way she was shaped and influenced, her longing for education and her deep feeling for the importance of education, her ethical integrity, her courage, and her development as an individual, we wanted to bring her contribution to public view. Here the singular pronoun her signifies the collective. The public act of writing an autobiography of the collective brings visibility to Dalit women activists and their contributions in history. Historian and political activist Y.D. Phadke, in the foreword of the book, has in fact criticized it for providing such a narrow scope of Indian women by including only Dalit women and thereby ignoring the upper caste women and sympathizers of Ambedkarite movement. Such criticism, as Vasant Moon points out in the reply to the foreword, completely misses the central argument of the book, which is tracing an alternative history from the viewpoint of Dalit women. This articulation itself presents a schism in the concept of Indian woman. It shows that unlike Phadke's claim, Indian woman cannot be seen as a universal, homogeneous category. In fact, the need to have a distinct autonomous political identity, Dalit women need to rise and realize about the difference from Savarna women and Dalit men. Vandana Sonalkar in the introduction to the book writes, a significant aspect of the narrative in this section is the naming of women who took part in various meetings and conferences in the 1930s and later. The content of their speeches is of course important, and as the authors tell us, the act of going on stage and articulating their views in public was a liberating experience and an achievement for these women. But the mention of women's names carries a certain weight in history of a kind. It is interesting to note that this biography interview section, many of the women interviewed also take pains to mention the names of other women who were involved in the movement with them. There is an act of solidarity in this naming, an act which these authors of the book carry forward into print. Now, the reason I provided such an elaborate background to the texture and the narrative structure of the book itself is also to highlight the intentionality of the text. When we look at movements, we are not just looking at their representation alone. We are also looking at the participation of the women and later representations in a way in which those women can be revived and transformed. So, the reason for this elaborate background to this text was to highlight the process and intention which led the writers to revive and recover Ambedkarite women. Now, let us see how women's participation, specifically Dalit women's participation in the Ambedkarite movements, differed from a dominant nationalist movement. To understand the Ambedkarite movement through a gendered lens, Urmila Pawar and Meenakshi Moon turned to Dr. Ambedkar's writings and speeches, especially those addressing the sexual oppression of Dalit women. These reflections lead them to revisit the anti-caste struggle from a feminist perspective. One key example is their reinterpretation of the Mahad Satyagraha. Now, while Dalit history has often celebrated it as an early collective history of reclaiming the public space and eradicating untouchability, Pawar and Moon focus on how Ambedkar's speech in the event challenged both caste and gender oppression faced by Dalit women. During his speech in Mahad, Ambedkar urged Dalit women to reject caste-based markers in their appearance, like wearing saris above their knees or leaving their breasts uncovered. Instead, he encouraged them to wear saris like Brahmin women because, as he said, Dalit women were just as respectable. This message had a powerful impact. As Pawar and Moon observe, after listening to Baba Saheb's speech, the women who had come to the conference turned up next day wearing their 9-yard saris around their ankles like Brahmin women. Mrs. Chitre and Mrs. Tipnis helped them to do this. This act symbolizes more than just a change in clothing. It reflects an awareness that caste-based humiliation is also gendered. In the Dalit feminist thought, the annihilation of caste necessarily includes the fight against such layered inequalities. It is crucial to understand that Ambedkar was not promoting Brahminical patriarchy by asking women to dress like upper caste women. Rather, his critique was aimed at how caste-specific clothing, like leaving the breasts uncovered, was historically used to degrade Dalit women and mark them as sexually available, especially because they worked in public spaces. Therefore, Ambedkar's suggestion was not about upholding caste norms, but about reclaiming dignity and self-respect for Dalit women. It was a call to reject a system that used dress codes to humiliate them, not to embrace the Brahminical idea that women are merely the honor of their families or communities. Now, Dalit women's participation in the Ambedkarite movements also found expression through cultural sphere. the so-called private or domestic sphere takes on new meaning in the songs of post-Ambedkarite Buddhist Dalit women singers, who found their own unique ways to reclaim Ambedkar. These women rose to prominence mainly in the cultural realm after Ambedkar's death. Their song often celebrated Ambedkar and his first wife Ramabai and were sung by women during everyday activities, while working with the grindstone at birth ceremonies, naming ceremonies, or harvesting occasions. This shows how the line between public and private life were blurred, both in the way Ambedkar was remembered and the choices of spaces where this memory was kept alive. Homes, fields, and ceremonies became places of political expression and resistance. One powerful example is a Marathi Ovi, a type of traditional women's folk song, which is displayed on the screen. The translation of this Ovi is, "To expel caste discrimination, Ambedkar, who is also called Bhima, married Savitabai, who was a Brahmin. He showed that this marriage is pure like Ganga water. Everyone sing in praise of Bhima." This song reflects how Dalit women saw intercaste marriage as a radical step towards ending caste discrimination. The reference to Ambedkar's second marriage to Savita Ambedkar, a Brahmin woman 13 years after the death of his first wife Ramabai. In highlighting this marriage, the song presents it not as a controversial act but as a symbolic and transformative one, pure like Ganga water. Through such verses, these women were not only honoring Ambedkar but also reimagining caste abolition from a deeply personal and feminist perspective. By singing about Ambedkar in their everyday lives, these women brought feminist and anti-caste movements in the heart of their domestic routine. As Gopal Guru writes, this tradition of singing can be seen as part of a broader feminist cultural consciousness. He notes that while Dalit women were often kept in the background during the pre-Ambedkarite period, in the Ambedkarite and post-Ambedkarite eras, they broke their cultural silence and stormed into the public transcript. Importantly, these women used folk forms of expression that were familiar and accessible. Songs like Palna, a lullaby song which was sung during naming ceremonies, and Ovi, a form of oral folk poetry during labor and chores, became powerful tools for resistance and memory. As Guru explains, while the Palna form was used only on the occasion of Ambedkar's birth anniversary, Ovi was used as a very effective cultural idiom to create and conserve the critical energies among Dalit men and women. In this way, Dalit Buddhist women did not just remember Ambedkar, they reshaped how he was remembered, using everyday songs to bring political meaning into private life and to link anti-caste struggle with a feminist cultural voice. Now, let us summarize today's lecture. In this lecture, we looked at how Dalit women's participation in the Ambedkarite movement offered a powerful alternative to dominant nationalist narratives that often center Gandhian politics and overlook marginalized voices. In movements like Ambedkar-led movement, Dalit women challenged both caste and patriarchy, presenting a different vision of freedom, equality, and agency. This is compellingly documented in We Also Made History by Pawar and Moon, a groundbreaking work that reconstructs Dalit women's history through archival research and interviews. The book does not just document events, it redefines historical writing itself by treating Dalit women as both subjects and narrators, validating personal experience as a political and historical source. It offers many narratives that center collective memory and lived realities over linear, elite-driven accounts. Pawar and Moon highlight how Dalit women's transformation, desire for education, and ethical conviction shaped their activism under difficult conditions. In doing so, the book reclaims agency for Dalit women and challenges the homogenized idea of the Indian woman, asserting the need for a distinct Dalit feminist politics. A key example is their reinterpretation of the Mahad Satyagraha, where Ambedkar's call for Dalit women to abandon caste-based clothing practices was not just about emulating Brahminical norms, but was about reclaiming dignity and rejecting casteist sexualization of their bodies. This gendered reading of Ambedkar's anti-caste politics reveals how the fight for self-respect was deeply intertwined with the fight against sexual and social humiliation. Furthermore, Dalit Buddhist women extended their activism into the cultural realm through folk songs like Ovi and Palna, which were sung during everyday domestic rituals. These songs, often about Ambedkar and his wife Ramabai, brought political consciousness into private spaces and transformed the home into a site of resistance. As Guru notes, these women broke their cultural silence and inserted themselves within the public discourse through familiar forms of expression. By doing so, they not only remembered Ambedkar but reimagined his legacy through a feminist anti-caste lens rooted in collective memory. In the next lecture, we will look at the issue of gender in Periyar's self-respect movement. Thank you.